Ahla wa sahla, welcome to the Qattan Foundation. We're happy to have you. We're honored, really, and it's a real pleasure to have Shahram Khosravi with us today. It's an honor to have you here. Shahram is a prominent Iranian anthropologist and professor of social anthropology at the University of Stockholm. And he's with us today, but I will take a small interlude to welcome Alessandro Petti, who introduced me, at least, or as a foundation, to Shahram, and to congratulate Alessandro and Sandy on the recent prize at the Venice Biennale. Ahlan, Alessandro. Professor Khosravi's research focuses on studies of borders, migration, precarity, and waithood. His work deeply delves into the human experiences of migrants and refugees and asylum seekers, shedding light on the complexities of their lives as they navigate displacement and challenges of adapting to new environments, offering us all a unique perspective on how individuals grapple with the fusion of past and present while envisioning new futures. Through ethnographic investigations and compelling narratives, including his own personal one, he explores the ways in which migration can disrupt traditional notions of time, memory, and identity. With a keen focus on the lived experiences of individuals, he unravels the intricacies of waiting, nostalgia, and the development of temporal strategies in the context of migration. As an accomplished author and academic, Khosravi has published numerous influential articles and books that have garnered international recognition. But his research has not only enriched academic discourse, but has also deepened our own understanding of human mobility, cultural dynamics, and intricacies in the human condition. We're really honored to have you in Palestine, especially in the context of our own case of refugees, migration, and you name it, and borders. So without further ado, let us welcome Professor Shahram Khosravi here, whose profound insights into the human experience continue to inspire and enlighten us. Ahlan wa sahlan.
Thank you so much for such a generous introduction. I'm very happy to be here. I'm very happy to be in Palestine for the first time, and also here at Qattan Foundation. So thanks for arranging this event. And talking about, to speak about borders in Palestine is not easy for me. It's not easy for me to talk about borders and bordering practices for an audience who have been experiencing borders and bordering practices in everyday life. So to speak about borders and bordering practices here is a challenge for me, ethically, emotionally, but also conceptually. Because borders are about senses, and when people who live here, they sense the borders every single day. Borders are about senses because they are constructed to be sensed, by touch, causing pain. The visual, you see them, you hear them, loudspeaker warning you about not approaching borders. But also you can test it, you can taste, there is a taste of borders. The taste of salt in the mouth of migrants who are drowning in the Mediterranean Sea, or the metallic taste in the mouth of people who are thirsty, waiting at the border for hours, days. That is the taste of borders. Geography is about construction of spaces and regulating bodies through spaces. But time is also important here. So this is the reason for the title of talk. It's about temporal bordering practices. Time is also important part of this regulating of bodies in spaces and places. And this is what I'm talking about today. But before that, let me take you to Iran, where I'm coming from. Let me take you to Zagros Mountains in Iran and to an indigenous people of Zagros Mountain, a people I'm coming from, Bakhtiari people. I want to start with that because language is important, concepts are important, because again, to be here and talking about borders is very difficult because language should be correct, to use correct words for something you talk about. Colonialism starts with language, and what the colonizer steal first are mother's concepts. I grew up as a Bakhtiari, indigenous people of Zagros Mountains in southwestern Iran, and I was sent to school in a city. It was Tehrani, Western-oriented education I received. And that education made me believe that my mother was an ignorant person because unlike my teachers told me, and my education told me, my mother used only one word for both distance and lateness. So my mother, like other Bakhtiari people, they use one word, dur, for a spatial distance and for temporal distance. Bakhtiaris, who have been historically nomadic people, they always understood spaces, geography in relation to time. So if you ask about years, so it was always references to geography. The year of flooding, the year no frog was seen around. So always years, time was related to geography. And this knowledge is indigenous people knowledge. That is old knowledge, that time is not separable from space. Time indeed is shaped by space. What we know as calendar system, dividing time into days, months, years, is formed through the Earth rotation within the solar system. So 1 year or 1 day. So this is time and space related to each other. Geography is a knowledge, as said, is about relation to spaces and places. Is social construction, through maps, cartography, borders, measures of distances. Time is very similarly social construction, yeah? And this is how colonization starts. So they turn space into empty space. And also they turn time into empty time. So time become empty of spaces. So the modern time, temporality, indigenous people received is empty of spaces, empty of rivers, empty of forests, empty of frogs, empty of anything which related to and this is what Walter Benjamin wrote about as time become homogeneous and empty. But the modern education, like colonizers' education, gave us another perception of time, and that time or that history was not including us. That history, which is modern history, kept us outside, and as Dipesh Chakrabarty put it, it's a waiting room of history. Or being outside the history, it means that you are late. As Frantz Fanon said, we arrive to the right time and it's always too late. So this belatedness is part of racialization of time, yeah? So how it is related to language, how people like indigenous people, they are not called indigenous, they are called tribes. And tribes is rooted in a racial ideology, which which creates a hierarchy of different communities, different people are in different stages of a social evolution process as a linear time. So tribes are people, a backward people, a delayed human beings who are always delayed. They arrived, but they arrive always too late. So this belatedness, this keeping people outside the white time, is very important to steal their land, steal their time, steal their resources. Stealing of land is not possible without stealing of mothers' concepts. Stealing mothers' concepts turn our knowledge into non-knowledge and words into non-words. And it took many years for me to understand how it works, how this colonial epistemology works, yeah? And how the coloniality of power construct what Miranda Fricker calls epistemic injustice. And epistemic injustice means turning the colonized person's capacity as knower as non-knower, turning her knowledge as non-knowledge. It took very long time for me to realize that I practice a knowledge, I practice and I teach a methodology which has been used against me and against people like me. So this racialization of time is not an abstract theory. It has very concrete consequences. As Charles Mills, African-American scholar, wrote about this racialization of time in the context of Black Americans' experience of long-term segregation. It's about this racial time is about unequal access to resources and power. So in order to keep the hierarchy, in order to exclude people from exclude people's access to resources. So you exclude them not only spatially, but also temporally. You exclude them from time. You create a kind of non-equalness. Racialization of time means that you arrive to a world in which bodies are already divided, a world where access to resources and power is allocated according to this logic of belatedness. So there is a race aspect there is, of course, a class, but also very much gender aspect in this belatedness. We know that nations are imagined communities, as Benedict Anderson wrote about. And these imagined communities are imagined not in terms of geography and spaces, but also in terms of time and temporality. It's about synchronization of the nation, that people believe that they are in the same time. And this came through, of course, modern technology, railways, and with railways to big cities came, clocks, timetable, and that was beginning of a new era. A new era of production, a new form of domination, a new form of extraction. So this is not strange that when people 1830 went out on the street in Paris to protest, it was part of French Revolution, they fired the clocks. So firing the clocks in Paris was part of a protest against a temporality that was against the poor. 2020, refugees burned down Moria camp. Moria camp on Lesbos was in Greece, was a notorious refugee camp. So they burned it down. So that was also very much like Parisian revolutionaries. It was against temporality. It was a burning down refugee camp, was firing clocks in Paris, was a protest against a camp temporality, border temporality of refuginess. You can also see in the Black Lives Matter movements that protest is also a kind of protest against a racialized temporality which exclude Black Americans. Same can be said about Iranian women's revolution in Iran since last year. Zan Zendegi Azadi, Women Life Freedom Movement, was a protest against first compulsory whaling politics, but in reality it is a protest against exclusion from temporality. It's against a kind of temporal apartheid to keep women outside the masculine time, stealing their time. So if nations are imagined temporally, then bordering practices exclude and include people not only spatially but also temporally. So borders are not only lines dividing territories, nation states, but they are a series of practices which can happen taking place in any time, any place, inside and outside. So we have a kind of externalization of borders, that borders are not where they are supposed to be. For example, Australian borders are in Manus Islands, or European borders are practiced in north of Africa or in Turkey. Yeah? Or UK are planning to send refugees to Rwanda. So this kind of externalization, that borders are moving, yeah, both outside but also inside. People who live in this land are very much familiar with these unpredictable borders. They can show up anytime, anywhere. And this is the logic of checkpoints, yeah? When I talk about temporal bordering, I talk about I will talk maybe 10, 15 minutes more, and then we can have a discussion. Yeah. When I talk about temporal borderings, so I talk about three forms of temporal borderings, which of course they are related to each other. And one is delaying, yeah? So to delay people. So borders do not stop people, but delay them. Delaying, for example, a journey from Athens to Berlin takes a couple of hours by air if you have European passport. But I know many people, for them, that journey took 2 years, 3 years. From Baghdad to Budapest, flight is only 4 hours. I know a person for whom it took 15 years. Impact of delay can be also very explicitly in a racially segmented labor market. Segregation of labor results in wage gap, meaning that migrants have to work much more to reach same income as non-migrants. For example, the median annual wage for full-time in 2018, 1 year employed Latina woman in the United States was 54% of median wage for similar job for non-Hispanic white men. It means that a Latina worker has to work 672 days to earn what the white man worker made in 365 days. She's delayed 307 days each year. This is the stealing of her time. Constantly delayed, and it is soon too late to go to university. It is soon too late to find a partner. It is soon too late to make a family, to build a family. It is a kind of being in a position of not becoming in what is supposed to be a normal life. It's supposed to be a normal life, of course, yeah? One consequence of that in labor market is de-skilling, yeah? So de-skilling, it means that individuals' education, individuals' skills, training become outdated when you have to wait 10 years, 15 years, then your education maybe is not, of same value as it was before. So this is how delaying is part of labor market mechanism. Delaying is, of course, racial, but also gender. Of course, women knows very well, this delaying mechanism, and what is the consequence of this delaying in their situation in labor market. Another aspect of this temporal bordering is waiting. So keeping people in waiting is another aspect of temporal bordering. And keeping people in waiting is a power relations, yeah, with long-term consequences. For example, in 1990s, two major groups of asylum seekers came to Sweden. One was Somalian asylum seekers, another was from Bosnian and Somalian, yes. The Bosnian refugees, they waited shorter to receive permission to stay, to work. Somalians waited much longer to receive permission to work, to stay, and then to get citizenship. And today, after 25 years later, we see consequences of that difference in Bosnians' much better position in labor market, their children's much better position in education system. So this is about very long-term consequences. So again, it's very much about labor markets. It's very much about controlling of labor force, and maintaining this hierarchy, which is already existing. When I'm talking about waiting, I'm talking about protracted waiting, prolonged waiting. I'm not talking about 1 year, 2 years. I'm talking about people who have been waiting 15 years of 25, 12 years of 20. 20 years old asylum seekers who have been waiting 12 years. And this is also visible in the global trends, that we see that we not only have the highest number of forced migrants and highest number of refugees since the Second World War, but also we see that they are in a refugee situation longer and longer. In 1990s, the average time to be in refugee situation was 9 years. In 2000 was 20 years. And of course, if you think about Palestinians, then we have been talking about 75 years, yeah? So, and that was the average, yeah? So this is about protracted refuginess. We all wait, but we wait differently. And of course, during the pandemic, it became very, explicit, this difference between the poor and the racialized, marginalized group. They wait differently than rich people and white people. The third aspect of this temporal bordering is keeping people in circulation. So unlike the usual idea that borders are to keep people immobile, to confine them in camps, one aspect of bordering is to keep them on movement, constantly on move. Yeah, so keeping people moving is also a control mechanism, and sending them back and forth between territories, between different legal status, different periods of waiting. It's kind of this keep them in circulation, as migrants would put it. They sending back to square one. Yeah, so they experience bordering practices is term of being sent back to square one, meaning that they have to start again and again and again. And this is part of this, what I've been talking about before, de-skilling and hierarchization of labor market. And these three aspects I mentioned have a very concrete, consequence, and it is stealing of time. So it is about a large amount of time, hours, weeks, years, decades. Yeah, people waiting and are delayed at borders, waiting in camps. So one question is, what happens to that amount of time? What result is outcome of this accumulation of stolen time? So when people are displaced, when people are deported, when people are delayed, it means that their time are disposed from them, and someone is making money out of that. Employers who don't need to pay when workers are deported, when workers are undocumented and they cannot complain. Imagine, I was also thinking about, Palestinian workers who go to cross checkpoints to work on the other side of checkpoints. And they are always delayed. They are always stolen of their time. And what kind of consequence has on the value of the labor? What it means for them and for the employers on the other side of checkpoints to value their labor, to pay them less. So it has very concrete consequences, which is not about nationalism, which of course is about nationalism, is about racism. But this racism and nationalism and racialization of time has very concrete, is not metaphors I'm talking about. It has very concrete consequences for people. So what I'm trying to say is what we see today as border regime today is part of a larger and older project of colonial accumulation, a colonial disposition through expulsion, through stealing time. So today, as yesterday, our time and our land are stolen because we are told that we have arrived too late, that we are belated people. So let me finish by something more maybe positive about waiting. When I was working on my book about waiting, I suffered from insomnia. And I realized that insomnia and waiting are very much similar to each other. Because when you wait, when you are forced to wait, you don't know what is, why you have to wait. But you want to end waiting. You want to wait less, of course. It's exactly same with insomnia. You don't know why you cannot sleep, and you want to sleep and to finish and insomnia. But waiting, it's etymologically means to watch, to be awake, a wakefulness, yeah? So waiting means to be in state of consciousness, to be aware of what is happening. So people who are waiting are not a passive, ignorant about their situation. They know very well what is happening because they want to save themselves, rescue themselves from that predicament, that condition. They look around, they collect information, they try to find a way out of that situation. And this is, in ancient ancient Greece, there was two terms for time. One was chronos, which was, this quantity of time, weeks, days, years. But there was also a term for quality of time, kairos. Kairos was a critical moment that things can happen. A kind of opening for change. I don't know if zaman has that meaning in Arabic. Zaman, maybe it means time, but also zaman can also mean this quality of time, a critical moment of change. So this waiting as wakeful navigation through material struggles, it means to hope. It means to direct one's minds towards the not yet, tomorrow. And a friend of mine, a Palestinian poet who grew up in a refugee camp in Jordan, and now he's doing his PhD in UK, Yusuf Qasemieh. I learned from him that waiting in Arabic, as also in Farsi, which is intizar. And intizar is related to nazar, which means to see, and also to manzar, which means landscape, view. So waiting means to see. And waiting means to have a view. So I wanted to finish my talk with this more hopeful aspect of temporality, that even if we are forced to wait, still we are in a state of wakefulness, and we are watching, and we are able to see a landscape, a view which might lead us to a not yet, world. Yeah, thank you.
Wow.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. I think if there's some questions around, I mean, we are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 people. Maybe we do it like a conversation. I'm interested, Shahram, to see if you've been cross-referencing more works in psychology as a field of study in relationship to waiting and consciousness. I mean, there's this work of Martin Seligman and the idea of also being in a loop where violence is really practiced on you continuously, and then there's a conditioning to your mind and body and psychology in a means that in a term that there's a sort of learned helplessness, that you feel like whatever you want to do is not really pushing you towards the future, so you stay still in your time, and then this is something that has been so much discussed in psychology, I think, under the title of learned helplessness. So how do you sort of see the hope, while the psychological studies would say that this is really part of the whole violence on the psychology, and you are so self-tamed to the system of waiting, and you don't have hope in the future, or pushing yourself in time towards the future?
Thank you. I don't know. I'm not familiar with that kind of literature. But I'm interested. Thank you for mentioning that. Let me also mention Ghassan Haj, who is a Lebanese, Australian, a Lebanese anthropologist who lives in Australia. He has coined a term, stockedness. Yeah, stockedness as a situation that you feel life is suspended, that you go nowhere, in life, So this kind of, But this is what you hear, when you talk to people who have been waiting for a long time. They say, nothing happens, this is dead time, They say, this is not part of my life. This is just exception, in the normal, otherwise, a normal life. But this is what they say, but if you look what they do, you see many things happen, Of course, in this waiting time, as I try to say in relation to wakefulness, that people are waiting, but they try to find a way out of waiting, and it means a lot of work, a lot of labor, So this not only listening to what people say, but also looking at what they do, show that waiting is not a moment of passivity, but it's also full of activity. And it means hope, So hope is not only as a feeling, but as a practice. So if we see hope as practice, like Sumud, Palestinian Sumud is a very good example of hope as practice, In 75 years, you practice every single day. It means hope, Even if people say there is no hope, but they practice hope with their bodies, So if we approach hope, in materially, what is the materiality aspect of hope? So we see much more,
Can I go? Thank you. I have a lot of sort of thoughts, so I hope that they will make sense if I can put them together. I kind of want to invite you to go back to where you started. It's zaman ومش زمنية. But the idea of how time and space are one word in your mother tongue, distance and time, you explained as one word, and how that could be, rather than a place of reflection, of sort of, or only being a place of reflection of how maybe that can affect how we think about time, as opposed to unthinking the time that's been imposed on us. So in a kind of in the world of modernity, we're either pre-time, as indigenous people that existed before history, or we're out of time, as people that have been erased, or we're in liminal time, this idea of waiting. Waiting for time to happen to us, the delay and the stealing of time that you're talking about. And those are the violences of modernity on us. And maybe we can take that waiting and the hopefulness that you're talking about and intidar, the sense that, Darwish was talking about an intidar, yani the waiting, and make that be the pathway back to what you were talking about as time and distance as being one. And so as opposed to sort of thinking against modernity and the commodification of time, how borders and time and hours are labor, and borders are about sort of what capitalism wanted to do with the world. And think about the hills that you were talking about when you first started, and how that sort of slate allows us to think about time, not outside of history, not the outside of history that we've been imposed upon that Walter Benjamin talked about, but rather otherwise history. Not responding to a sort of modernity imposition of time, but thinking about how we can think together as, why is it that your mother tongue has time and distance as one? And how maybe that can help us think about what temporality can mean for us, as opposed to our time being stolen. It was our conceptions of time that were stolen. So how can we sort of think about that in a different way? So I just want to invite you to help us think about what your mother used to refer to as time and distance as one, and how that sort of can affect how we think about temporality in an otherwise way.
Thank you. I mean, for me, it's also, something new. So as I said, I realized that how my mind was colonized mind. So this is a process also new for me. So I'm working on that, to learn, to go back, to find, concepts, my mother and my grandmother's, concepts, and to, it's not about going back to roots, it's not that, going, not at all, It's very much Fanonian, how to look forward, to imagine otherwise, how this concept from grandmothers can help us to imagine otherwise a different future, to dream differently, so
What was the word again?
Dur. Dur in official, language means only distance geographically. It should not be used for time. But my mother and other Bakhtiyar use dur for also lateness, to be late, And it was wrong according to this Tehrani Western-oriented education system. But, in the 1980s, there was a Swedish geographer, Torsten Hägerstrand. He became very famous for his theory of adding time to maps, And he started this new approach to geography and cartography, that adding a new dimension to understand geographical relations by adding time to that. So this is what indigenous people have been doing before, But they have been practicing, This is epistemic injustice, That this modernity came in and make a very clear distinction, what is modern, what is not modern, And what is not modern was my mother knowledge, which was classified as non-knowledge, But then when this Torsten Hägerstrand came and published in peer-reviewed journals, then it is science, This is part of this modernity progression, So this is I think I try to do that, you know. I try to go back and find, you know, for example, another concept in terms of, you know, in relation to hope, I find this Arabic word tawakkul. I don't know if I pronounce it good or, you know, tawakkul is Islamic, you know, that you trust in God, yeah. And from my experience as anthropologist, you know, when I talk to people in very hopeless situation and they talk about tawakkul, it's a kind of, again, hope as practice, yeah, hope as method, yeah, that you turn to tawakkul when there is no hope. How you can have hope when there is no hope, yeah? So in these situations, yeah, when people are, you know, in horrible situation of undocumentedness, deportation, and multiple deportation, you know, extreme poverty, how can they keep hope, yeah? So how, I mean, apart from this theological aspect of tawakkul, how this tawakkul can help us to understand, you know, hopefulness in the landscape of hopelessness, yeah? Yeah. And how it is, you know, materialized in everyday life, how it is practiced, yeah? So if you practice every single day to say, I belong to this land and this land is mine, and demanding back, this is practice of hope, yeah? This is hope as method.
Also, I would like maybe to go back in the moment that you talked about the burning of Lesbos, of a refugee camp, also as a revolutionary act, and maybe thinking together what is the difference of the obsession of Israeli burning and continuing destroying refugee camps, no? In which way, what is in that sense the difference, especially in relation to the passage of time? Is there a moment in which a refugee camp becomes something else because of its perpetual temporary existence, in which people today maybe might not burn their own refugee camps, but actually become this existential threat to a state? Because otherwise you cannot explain why Israel, whenever there is also their own internal problem, they always see a refugee camp as their own existential threat, no? As if the very existence of a refugee camp put into question the existence of Israel. Otherwise you cannot explain, this absolute violence that is constantly erupting in refugee camps. So I was just wondering, what is that difference, that difference and the necessity, or maybe the political strategy that emerge when there is a certain time in which a camp is only a place of detention, and that maybe relate also to your understanding of waiting. There's a moment in which waiting becomes something else, in which not only is an imposition, no, but it becomes also a place for doing something else. And what is, if there is a time, I'm thinking about also other camps in the world. Is Dadaab in Africa, for example, is there 20 years in which the camp becomes something else? Is it the passage of time that, in a way, produce something that is not anymore only a place of detention, it's not only a place of suffering, but because of the passage of time, because of the waiting, people transform, and that is the side, maybe the optimist part, because people are actually able to transform that moment not only as being passive and waiting there, but are able to produce something else, in which they themselves, they might not burn anymore the camp, but actually it is the power of the state that is obsessed in erasing the existence of the camp because they see as a threatening to their own existence. So I was just wondering if you can come back to that and maybe think together, what is the difference? You know, what is the difference that you see the burning of a refugee camp as almost liberations, but maybe cannot be said the same in the case of the Palestinian refugee camps, you know, or can be, you know, can we imagine the same thing? Would they have the same effect or not?
No, thank you. I don't know. I don't think there is one, you know, answer to that. I mean, there is, as you know better than me. I mean, your work on you know how camp become, you know, permanent, you know, temporalities, you know, temporariness. It's we have different kinds of camp. Yeah, we have different contexts of camps. You know, Moria camp in Lesbos is very different from, you know, camps here. You know, which is different. I think that there are different logic in that, but also similarities. Yeah. Also, before Moria was burned down, you could see that people try to bring life into that horrible, you know, place. I know a rapper, you know, he produced rap, you know, hip hop songs in camp. Another one, you know, a young woman from Afghanistan, she wrote poetry. She could publish it later, you know, it's small, short pamphlet, but still, you know. So, and other people, you know, made food and could make money, you know, that life is coming, you know, that as Anna Singh, anthropologist, wrote about ruinations, you know, in her very famous book, Mushrooms in the End of the, you know, World, I guess, the title. Yeah, she writes about, you know, ruination of life, yeah, generally. But in that ruins, yeah, we see mushrooms are growing, yeah, signs of life, yeah. So same in Asia camp, you know, that despite all, you know, horrible, you know, background, situation, condition, it's full of life, yeah. It's full of hope as practice, yeah, hope as method. So to back to your question. So I don't know. I want to know more about, you know, why Israelis want to burn down camps and want to displace people in camps once again. What is the logic in their head? Is it again, you know, part of this keeping people moving, yeah? So keeping people in circulation, yeah? So if, let's say, people are establishing themselves in one place, so this, you know, racist regime is coming in and want to displace them once again, to keep them on move once again, to keep them in circulation. Maybe, you know, this keeping people in circulation, that they cannot, you know, finding themselves established in one place is part of these bordering practices. Maybe, I don't know.
Sorry, can I talk again? I think it's about settler time and settler space. So settler logic has to do with settler time and settler space, and there's a confinement for settler colonialism, and they're confined in their violence. So over time, they can never be anything but violent. And that's a different kind of confinement of their own making. And I think that's how I read Israeli settler colonialism. It's strange to read them as confined, but that's how I read that kind of settler time. And we have no space. There is no place for us in that settler time, other than being the bodies that are being burned. But that's the eternal question of the border that you're talking about, keeping people in a state of suspension or waiting. So what's the difference between stealing time and delayed time? Or are they sort of similar?
Yeah, no, first, when we were on the way from Bethlehem to Ramallah today with Alessandro in the car, so and Alessandro was explaining to me about constructions of this or that. So I was thinking how Israel is imagining this land in 50 years from now, and I was thinking they imagine this land in 50 years from now with no Palestinian around. So this is how they design this landscape. So maybe this is, they burn it down again and again and again, keep them in circulation. Because in their imaginaries, in 50 years from now, there is no Palestinian around, yeah? So this is just, I don't know, it came to my mind. But, stealing time is a consequence of delaying, yeah? So delaying people, keeping them in prolonged waiting, sending them in circulation, keeping them in endless circulation. What it results in is disposition of time. Of these people are robbed of time. Their time are stolen. Yeah. So stealing time is a consequence of yeah.
And I want to come back. To Alessandro. I think when you worked on the returns and when you juxtaposed the future in the time that we imagine that time is not delayed and we attain our future, the fast forward of who we are, and you juxtapose it with waiting at the camp, so the returns become juxtaposed as one word back to the language as staying. So the returns and staying in the refugee camp becomes one, and the geography are combined. So the geography of return becomes the refugee camp at the same time. So I like that kind of more waiting as consciousness is really how can we use the strategy of time and juxtaposing different notion and back to your mother's language, and where things collapse, time and space is collapsing in one word. So I think this would really much more for me as hope than just waiting and doing the normal. I mean, yeah, I can see that, but then also how can we deal with the stealing, waiting, and delayed time? So how can we reverse them, subvert them in words and language? As you started your lecture, language is very essential and important. So I think this would really be a strategy for dealing with that heavy violence of time.
Said, colonizers, what they do is turning time empty, and turning waiting time into empty time, which is not, what I tried to say, but, waiting as a moment of wakefulness, yeah?
Shukran. Like so many thoughts intersect, and I hope I can be clear somehow. I want to go back to the idea of bordering as exclusion and inclusion, and your talk, how it is impacted by the categories of gender, race, and class. But then you also said it is for the purpose somehow to control the labor force, which leads to imperial domination of the capitalist order, right? Like as if all these bordering and rebordering constructions, whether conceptually or materially as physical, like we see around Europe, US-Mexico border, here in Palestine, even in China, Hong Kong, and the border. As if this plays from within the neoliberal capitalist world order. But then paradoxically, I went back to pre-1990 era, like the fall of Berlin Wall, and that is somehow a border. But then I thought, like, before 1990, it was a border between two camps, two competing camps, two ideologies, two modes of production. But then how paradoxically, after 1990, when we ended up with the fall of Berlin Wall, regardless of whether we're with or against the communist regime or governance. But after that, we witnessed the wall collapsed, but then so many borders erected, like but different modes of borders coming out, playing from within this capitalist global order, right? So that's like somehow I'm trying to think of bordering how it was between two camps, and then it ended up from within one camp, a world order, a capitalist one, for the sake of like reinforcing imperial domination through exploitation, labor exploitation mainly. And I'm thinking here of a publication by Walia Harsha, or Harsha Walia's Border and Rule, where she also elaborates on this notion of like how ideology is constructed, how border is reconstructed for the purpose of imperial domination. So that's a thought I wanted to reflect on. The other one is the idea of hope and cultivating hope. And I think there's a poem by Darwish that ends somehow like when we are in an era of darkness or in the waiting, we cultivate hope. That's the only way. But the question is like how do we cultivate hope? And I think this is a question that one has to diagnose what is the problem first, so that when we say like what is the practice of hope that might help us dismantle or overcome delay, waitness, or the circulation, and not just like on the individual level, like spiritually or like mentally or psychologically, which is very essential, I believe. But there is the social collective component that is essential to it. And I think here, for example, we as Palestinians, like we also experience this idea of like community building, collective community building. We see it like this strong bond on the social level in times of crisis. But also, I'm also thinking of migrant communities abroad, like in the UK, for example, or in Europe, where we find community building. Like we have, like for example, the Indian community, the Chinese community, like the Muslim community. So they try to build up somehow communities in the host countries, and that. Well, I have some reservations here because, like, I think that this leads to multiculturalism, and I somehow, like, question the. Multiculturalism and having like this community identity can help people to somehow overcome the everyday hardship they encounter. But then, but it also like a question of representation, political representation in host countries, which is also problematic. So I don't know, like I'm trying to take like also practice of hope, not just only on the individual level, or also just the practice of words to disrupt the system, this Homi Bhabha's location of culture, like this a gentle, like words and prose and poetry, this gives voice to the voiceless, and thus it disrupts the system and the Eurocentric world. But I think one has to also like extend our conception of what are the obstructions, what are the challenges. And there's a third one, if I may. Like I was fascinated, there's a novel by Abdulrazak Gurna, it's named By the Sea, and other one is Admiring Silence. And one thing that stopped me is how migrants somehow, when they are at the border, how they play with silence as a mechanism to disrupt the border system, like somehow a surviving mechanism. So in the narration, like By the Sea, this is a narrative about the I think a Zanzibari migrant, Zanzibari man traveling to the UK, and then he is stopped by the UK border and by the British officer. And the only way to rescue himself and to pass through the system is to play the game of silence. It's like, yeah. So like somehow it like recaptures the agency of maybe the vulnerable somehow. But we also realize that this is not enough. Like there is room for maneuver in the waiting, but we also understand that to be able to maneuver waiting and delay and circulation, one has to have like a solid lever, like to be able to confront and to maybe strategically like plan for the future. So I don't know, these are like thoughts, and thank you.
Thank you for sharing your thoughts. I can say something about what you said about what to do, what is, the strategy. This is why I started with, talking about indigenous people, talking about tribes, why we are not tribes. I mean, the language is the first tool of colonizers, yeah? And by calling people tribes, it means creating division, partition, distance. You are tribe A, another is tribe B, tribe C, so that kind of distance, disconnection. But if we talk about instead of tribes, we talk about indigenousness, then we refer to shared histories, because in all cases, no matter continents, yeah, look at the history of indigenous people, we say same pattern: stolen lands, colonial racism, etc. Yeah, stealing of time. So how we can go back and show this connectedness, that we share same history of violence, same history of being a stolen land, stolen time, then we can link linking experiences. Yeah, in German language there are two words for experience, unlike English. In Scandinavian languages also two words for experience. In German is Erlebnis, which is individual, immediate experience, and Erfahrung, which is more collective. So how we can turn this individual, immediate, isolated experience to historical, accumulated, collective history, then we have something to work with, yeah? Otherwise, we are tribes, isolated and alone. And one example of that is during so-called refugee crisis in the Balkans, then Afghani, people from Kashmir, Pakistani, Iranians, many Arab-speaking people protested against camps, against borders, against fences, and they chanted slogans, and they chanted in Arabic, Infitah, and in Farsi, Azadi. Infitah, openness, and Azadi, freedom. And both of them have been same slogans which has been chanted in Damascus, in Cairo, in Tehran, or Azadi in Tehran, in Kashmir, and in Kabul. Yeah? So how they linked protest against fences in Europe and protest against dictators in the Middle East. Yeah, so this is also another aspect of linking experiences and linking struggles together. And the last thing I want to say is the silence and Grunez. There is a Martinique poet, Edouard Glissant, who wrote about that transparency was a colonial demand, the colonial demand of seeing everything, the colonial demand of understanding everything, colonial demand of transparency, and how we can resist that. This is the right to opacity, yeah? The right of not documenting everything. As a scholar myself, you know, it's my duty to not write everything, yeah? To not, you know, to respect the right to opacity, yeah? Opacity is an anti-colonial methodology, and we should respect that and practice that.
Thank you so much. That was fascinating. I was thinking about the concept of tawakkul versus intizar. So I understand tawakkul as idle and waiting for a savior, while because you want a bigger power to sort out your situation, while the action of waiting, or conscious waiting, if you would, is it like, it could be like waiting could be a tool of resistance, so linking to keeping people in circulation. So why they're attacking refugee camps. So for example, at the entrance of Jenin refugee camps, it says محطة انتظار حتى العودة, a station of waiting until return, right? So waiting in the refugee camp is actually a mode of resistance. So we're not waiting idle, but actually resisting while waiting, and the hope is return, right? But when you talk about tawakkul, you're just sitting around and waiting for a bigger power that you don't really understand to save you from your situation. So I think, I don't know how you're linking them and if that makes any sense.
Yeah, thank you. When I, this playing with these concepts, it's a way to going away from Western concepts, waiting, hope. Instead of waiting, approach this time, temporality with concept of intizar, which means to see, yeah, and landscape. And as said, of course, yeah, tawakkul is an Islamic, term, trust in God, of course, you trust in God that God will save you, yeah? But how we can use these tawakkul out of this theological context, yeah? And tawakkul, because, when people are, again, when people are saying we are just waiting and this waiting time is dead time, they are not sitting and just waiting. They do a lot of things, yeah? So people who tell me that we have tawakkul, it doesn't mean that they are passively just sitting and waiting for God to help them. At the same time, they are driving taxis, they are digging wells, they are working on farms, they are teachers, they are mothers, they are, they are doing a lot of things at the same time. They are keeping tawakkul, yeah? So tawakkul, which is, related to waiting, is not, for me, going beyond this theological aspect and see it in how it is materialized in everyday life, yeah? And when we look at this materialization of tawakkul in everyday life, we see that it is far beyond this passivity, yeah? And it's full of activities, yeah.
But it's still, it's not passive. Yani tawakkul is being with God, or having God with you. It's, I mean, whether you have faith or not, yani, but it's this idea of tawakkul ala rabbna, and we're sitting here, but God is with us. It's not we're not just waiting for God to save us, right? So this, within the theology and within an everyday faith, it's you're standing at a border and you're saying la ilaha illallah. It's not because you don't have anything, you're not doing anything, but you're just not doing it alone. That's the idea of faith. So I don't think tawakkul and intidar are in diametric opposition of each other. I think they actually complement each other.
Yeah. Yeah.
يلا عشان لازم ننهي احنا.
Hi, Shahram. So
Hi,
nice
good to
you.
see you.
Thank you. It also comes from a place where you think that you're on the right side. That's why you think that that God is gonna help you at some point, because you're like in the right side of that cause, whatever the cause is. So I think it also have this meaning of like being ethically on the right side, and God is gonna intervene sometime, but it doesn't necessarily mean that you're passively waiting.
No.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, maybe, just, for me, it's a training, yeah? For me now, what I'm doing after how many years? God knows how many years as anthropologist.
25 years.
25 years. Thank you.
We agreed we're not counting time. That's
Yeah, exactly. Thank you. After, yeah. So when I realized that methodology and the knowledge I know as anthropologist, as a professor in this discipline, is against me, against the people like me, then this is why I'm trying to find other concepts, yeah? I try to find other concepts to understand waiting, temporality, migration, borders, etc. So this is, yeah.
Thank you so much, Shahram. It was really fascinating, the discussions, and especially tawakkul. Yeah, Alexandra would really have the last one, and the last one, that's it.
No, because it's always so beautiful to think together. So I think now we are warming up. But anyhow, we'll finish. I know, going back to this idea of collapsing of space and time, no, and the fact that maybe what was the word that your grandmother?
Dur.
Yeah, and speculating on that, because one of the problems I have also with the word hope, and now there's a little bit this kind of messianic moment in which we wait because there is at some point things will be solved by God, by revolutions, that prevent us to live into the present. Prevent us and that's why we don't see that actually we are living. This is why also conceptually, because we are constantly somehow projected into a future that is another of this, that modernity brought us, that makes impossible to live into the present. So one of the maybe positive effect of waiting, even though at the beginning is imposed, that force you to live into the present, collapsing space and time.
Yeah.
And that maybe could be an interesting point of theorizations from there to see what does it mean, what can happen into the present without maybe perpetuating to think there is hope that in a way it's always postponed to another moment, another time. And entering to these more theological discussions of waiting for God and revolution to save us, no?
Exactly. No, I totally agree. This is why I go back again and again to the materiality aspect of, how waiting is, or hope are materialized in everyday life. So not inshallah, but mashallah. So
Well, I need to conclude the conversation. It's interesting to always think, Alessandro, but there are some other people that need to go home and do other things that other than listening to all of us talking about tawakkul. But I totally agree, tawakkul and waiting. I think it's, but tawakkul also is delaying the inevitable as well. Tawakkal ala Allah. this is used as well. Well, anyway, I want to say another time thank you, Shahram, and I hope this is not the only time, we're going to see you more. I hope so, and we talked about that. And inshallah, mashallah. And I want to remind the listeners online and the audience online that we have 4 books of Shahram now, because he's generous enough to give the library at the Qattan another 2 books. So we have Illegal Traveler, we have Precarious Lives, Seeing Like a Smuggler, and this is very important to one of our projects, by the way. And The Waiting, was it The Waiting? Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, so thank you so much for your generosity, Shahram.
Thank you.
And hope to see you
It was a pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.